Hello and welcome to another episode of The Mind Show with me, Nelson Dellis, your host, four-time USA memory champion. And today we're going to be talking to Gabriel Wyner, who is a polyglot, a person who knows multiple languages. So he studied opera, which is often sung in multiple languages, and eventually realized he wanted to learn a language and kind of figured out the hacks to learn languages quickly and efficiently. What's the right way to do that? And now I believe he speaks almost 7 languages to a high degree of fluency. And it's a fascinating read. It's a fantastic book that he wrote, which is called Fluent Forever. It came out in 2014, and I've referred to it and read it numerous times. It's really got some beautiful tips and gems in there that you can take home and apply to learning an actual language. And I mean actually learning it. You know, so many people go into courses, language courses, or buy books to learn it on their own, and they walk away with nothing. Maybe a few learned words, but no fluency in the language. And that's a common thing. And the funny thing is that learning language is probably one of the most, wanted skills that people want for themselves. How nice would it be to be able to speak Italian or speak French fluently, right? We all would love to be able to do that. So this book addresses that. It addresses the right way and the quickest way to gain some proper fluency in the language of your choice. So we're going to talk with Gabriel right now and see what he's working on, how he got into this, how it was writing the book, and some tips for the listener, you guys, to walk away with for when you want to learn a language. So without further ado, let's dive into the conversation, and I hope you enjoy it. Welcome to another episode of The Mind Show with me, Nelson Dellis, and our guest today is Gabriel Wyner, famed author of Fluent Forever, which is an awesome book. If you haven't gotten it, go out and buy it. It's a great read, well written, and super helpful. Thanks for being on this show. How you doing?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I've been a fan of your blog ages ago, and then your book. I think you sent me one of the first copies of it, so I could write you a little blurb about it.
You're on the blurb.
Yeah.
You're on the cover.
That's right. Yeah. So I'm really excited you're here. Where are you? Where are you based out of?
Now I'm based in Chicago. I moved here about a month and a half ago now.
Okay. All right. Cool. And so I guess the best place to start is to kind of give me your background. Tell me who you are for people who are listening or watching.
Sure.
Yeah.
Let's see. My background originally was in opera. I used to be a professional opera singer before all this book and language stuff happened. And that kind of led into the language stuff in the sense that I needed to learn a bunch of languages for opera. I needed to learn Italian, German, French, Russian would be good. And with that kind of requirement, with that kind of stuff ahead of me, it became useful to start looking for efficiency hacks.
Yeah, sure.
Because they're 4 times as useful for me than for most people.
Yeah.
So I could spend 4 times as much time looking for them and it would still be worth it. Basically I got myself into a situation where I cheated on a test, and in order to get into a French program that I didn't belong into, I cheated too well. They stuck me in a program that was way above my level, and I had 3 months to kind of learn French, at least up to an intermediate level. Okay. And I had no time. And so I sort of discovered spaced repetition. I had already had some experience with German and Italian, and I had kind of figured out that the translation was not going to help me. And so I started combining spaced repetition with flashcards that didn't involve anything other than French or pictures. Okay. And at the end of the 3-month period where I was studying basically an hour a day and then a lot on Sundays, I showed up to my first conversation in French, because they have an interview in the beginning to kind of force you to well, to make sure you didn't cheat. And and I had a conversation in French, and I realized I could actually think in French, and I had a full 15-minute conversation. She was like, "Oh, we placed you in the wrong class. You need to be bumped up to another level
higher." Wow.
Yeah. And by the end of that, it was like I was fully fluent in French in 5 months, basically. It was 3 months of my own studies and 2 months of that immersion program. And I thought, this is something that needs to be spread around. And that's where all this stuff started.
That's amazing. So growing up, where did you grow up?
Los Angeles.
Los Angeles. Okay. And are your parents American? Are they from somewhere else? Do they speak other languages?
My parents are American. My mother is, I guess, second generation, first generation. Her parents came over from... now is Ukraine, I think. It's like Transylvania, basically. But but they were her mother spoke everything. I think she speaks like 6 or 7 languages. But in the house, my grandmother and my mother spoke Yiddish together.
I see. Okay.
And so my mother is bilingual in Yiddish, but they never spoke that around us, around me and my brother. So
your upbringing was pretty much English.
It was English, although we did go to a Hebrew elementary school, and so we were taking Hebrew lessons every day. But at the end of the 7 years of Hebrew school, I didn't know anything. I mean, it was kind of frustrating. I could read the alphabet, and right now, if someone like I'm working on Hebrew right now for my app development stuff, and I know like 20 words. It's really frustrating.
You took 7 years of it, yeah.
Yeah, and like I can I'm surprised at all the pronunciation stuff, like in terms of the spelling rules and stuff in Hebrew. I'm like, this is how this works. Like that's how you say that word, and I just feel so stupid having spent all that time, and not gotten really much of anything.
Right. I mean, I feel like that's the common story, at least in the United States, where for example, my fiance, she took French and Italian all through high school. She was in the advanced classes, and you walk away with nothing, and it's crazy. I was lucky to have been brought up with French-speaking parents, so it was always drilled in us. We lived there, and so I could say I was fluent, but a lot of Americans don't get that opportunity, and it's I think there's probably, and you probably know better than I do, but the way that it's taught and the way that they approach it in high schools isn't necessarily the best way to learn a language.
I think that's true. Yeah. I mean, I think even if you have good teachers, and I had that experience again after this whole Hebrew thing. I did it again with Russian. I took 5.5 years of Russian in sort of, I don't know, junior high and high school, and it's like I left there also with basically nothing, and I had good teachers, and like that was the really frustrating thing. It's like I chose that language because of the teachers.
Yeah.
And I still left with nothing. And it's like, there's something really wrong with the methodology that the people are using.
Yeah. But that's great to hear that you came from a background with basically no foreign language and that here you are. So how many languages do you speak now?
I don't know, 6 3/4, 6.5. I'm most of the way
fluent, right? This would be fluent?
I mean, where do you draw the line in terms of fluency is tricky. But I can think and have conversations in these languages. And so I guess if you're including English, then it's 7-ish. I'm most of the way through Japanese. I have honestly, I'd love to give it another year. I only have 3 more months because my fiance's requiring me to learn Spanish this year for our wedding. So.
Okay. Is she Spanish?
She's Mexican-American, yeah.
Okay. Got it. So with those 7 languages, 6 and change, you can be dropped. You could live in those places where they speak it and survive well and comfortably, right?
Yes, I would say Japanese is almost there. I was just there over the summer. I spent a month there, and it was like I could get around. Like it was this. I can function, and I can even have sort of conversations. But like that's a big language. Like that has there's so much data that needs to be brought in there that it's like. It's a real undertaking, but still, like Japanese, yes, I can function, and the other ones are generally above that level.
Okay, so let's go through the list. What do you have? You have English, part Japan.
Yes.
Japanese. I mean, what else?
German is fluent. French at its peak was similar to German. I would say was at a C1, almost C2 level in terms of the European ratings, but like is a good level of fluency. Would take a month or so to get back. Russian was slightly below French, but was at a very, very good level. I think I got certified at B2 in the European thing, which is like, can handle most situations. Italian it's just under Russian, but it was at a pretty good level. I've been to Italy a number of times and can run like conversations, stuff like that. Yeah. Hungarian, I chat every week with my tutor, and we just chat about life. That's at a pretty good level. What am I missing? Am I missing anything? Japanese? Is that 6, 7?
I think so. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that.
That's good. And what's your favorite or easiest? I don't know. What was the? I guess Russian probably was the most difficult.
I mean, Japanese is by far the most difficult.
Oh, really?
Japanese is like there's actually good data on this as to like which languages are supposed to be hard for English learners. Like Japanese is supposed to be twice as hard as Russian, plus a little bit. Okay. And it's bearing out. Like, yeah, that's just it's definitely twice as much data, if not a little bit more. I don't know. I mean, the interesting thing about these languages is that as first languages, like if you're just purely bilingual, like your background,
right?
Like generally, if you look at studies and things, like your personality should be roughly the same in the two languages if you grow up that way.
Yeah.
You might notice slight differences, but for the most part, you are you in French or you in English. Mm-hmm. But as a second language learner, you're picking up this language and you're forming memories only in a particular chunk of your life.
Oh, that's true. Yeah.
With particular experiences, and it's not the whole thing. It's not all of you. It's just a little segment of you.
Yeah.
And so that forms its own little personality. And so, like Italian, I learned exclusively eating awesome food in Italy.
Which is the way you should learn that language, I think.
Yeah, and so Italian, like I would say Italian is right now is probably at the lowest level of my languages, and I really want Italian to be at a higher level when I ever get time to do this thing. But like Italian's associations, every single word in Italian is associated with the best things and no negative experiences.
Okay.
And so that one probably wins in terms of overall positivity, even though it's at probably the lowest level.
Yeah, okay. Got it. That was actually my one of my questions was, how do you find your personality and your kind of body language and everything when you talk in these different languages? Because, I mean, I grew up speaking French, but I do feel like, not that I'm a different person, but I definitely, like, my mannerisms are different, and I think my voice probably shifts in tone, and just the way I move. It's a bizarre thing, but if that's the way I have to do it, otherwise it doesn't feel like I'm speaking it correctly, you know?
But, I mean, you're learning this thing from particular sources, and those sources are going to be making those body motions, and like in some cases, even the pronunciation forces your mouth in a position that is just different. And so, I think it comes relatively naturally as long as you're careful about where you're getting your language. I mean, if you're getting most of your content from native speakers, then that's going to come in, I think, without a choice in the matter. Right. I think one of the problems is that when you're studying something, I think a lot of people have like studied a language in high school from like American teachers who don't value accent and don't really value that kind of thing, and then so you get teachers coming in saying like, oh, bonjour everybody, and like everyone's like bonjour, and like it ruins it. Like, so if you're careful about sources, I think that will come automatically.
Yeah. So I just want to ask a little bit about that school you mentioned that you went to, where you placed yourself higher, but you actually got placed higher when you got there. Was that the Middlebury program?
Yeah, that's the Middlebury program.
Okay.
Yeah,
I've heard about it. I think through you for the first time. I'd heard about it a few years ago. Can you tell me more about it for listeners?
Yeah, the Middlebury programs are amazing. I can't recommend them enough. They're the most inconvenient thing in the world, which is to say that it's full immersion. You sign a contract that says if I speak one word that's not German or not Italian or not whatever I'm studying, then I'm going to get kicked out. No refund. Yeah, they're intense, and you have to put your whole life on hold. Like that's the problem with Middlebury is that the thing you want is the most inconvenient thing that you could want. I want to put my whole life on hold and do this one language. But like that is the most effective thing you could possibly do. There's no way you can get that kind of like data dump into your head than 24/7. It's like 24/7. Like you start dreaming in French. I started dreaming in German my first time in 3 weeks with zero German background.
That's crazy.
There were stupid dreams. They were just like, the table is blue, like the worst dreams ever.
Yeah.
But I was dreaming in German in 3 weeks. At that point, it's like 24/7 German, because I'm like, you can't get more than that. Even in terms of all this spaced repetition stuff I advocate for and all that, like, I'm not actually confident that I'm confident that the final results of that, in terms of if you're just going to dump yourself in Middlebury, let's say you have zero German, whatever, you go to Middlebury for German, and you dump yourself in, and you're using my stuff, or you're just kind of sitting there doing whatever. I think at the end of the 7 weeks, you're going to be at a similar level, whether or not you're using really efficient spaced repetition stuff, or you're just dumping it in, because it's 24/7. Like, you can't do more than that. It's only after the fact that you might retain something longer. But I guess the thing to say about Middlebury is that because all the students have signed these contracts, you get a level of intensity that you can't get even if you go to the countries. Because Italian, as I said, I learned in Italy, and you go to class, like Italy, you can find schools where they're super cheap and they will give you 30 hours of class a week. Okay. And it's awesome. And every 50 minutes, there's a break to have, espresso, because that's important. And during those 10-minute breaks, everyone is speaking English.
Okay. Yeah. And then you break it up right there. Yeah.
Yeah.
So this Middlebury program is how many weeks or how many months?
Depends on the language. If you're looking at a language that uses Latin characters, then it's 7. And then the other ones, they used to be 9, now they're 8.
Okay. And you go, it's like summer camp, right? You sleep there. And are you grouped by the people in your class? Like if you're doing German, you're only with German speaking?
Yes. Okay. You're basically not allowed to interact with the other schools, and they have 4 or 5 cafeterias on campus, and they offset the lunch times so that you never actually see the other schools for the most part, except for breakfast.
Got it.
They're clever about it. You really do. It's an immersion experience that is really carefully thought out.
Got it. So if you wanted to go from 0 to some pretty good fluency in a language, you would recommend that if you have the time and money, I guess?
Yeah, I think they're if you basically just want you just want to show up, and in the end something happens and you basically don't have a choice in the matter.
Yeah.
Middlebury is a great thing for that. Yes.
Yeah. I feel like that's a big part of the problem is people just want to show up somewhere and then come out with something else. Obviously, there's a lot of work that has to be done in there, but at least you're going there and forced to do it.
Yes. And it's just I think sometimes people need the kick in the butt of just I need to be forced to do this, and Middlebury will force you to do it, or you will just cry for 7 weeks.
Yeah. So speaking of putting that aside, let's talk about your book. Tell me about the story, how it came to be, because you had your website first. When did you decide to develop that website, first of all?
After that experience in French, where I realized that this is important, then I started writing about it. Actually, for my master's thesis, I was in it was a song master's program in Vienna, and I asked them, "Hey, can I write about language learning?" And they're like, "Yeah, sure." And so I wrote this master's thesis sort of geared towards singers and saying, this is, here's how singers should learn languages. Okay. And at the same time, I was also very active on the language learning subreddit on Reddit.
Yeah. Okay.
And people would ask questions like, "Hey, how do I do this better?" Like, "Hey, I'm trying to learn French and I only have 3 months." And I'm like, "I know exactly what you should do." And so I started writing these responses, and the responses started becoming really long. It turned into this, I just sort of saved the response that I would give to people because it was sort of applicable to most questions of just how do I do X? And I kept expanding upon it and just adding another paragraph when someone asked a different question and saying, here's what I usually say, and here's addressing your issue. Yeah. And it turns into this 3-page long reply. This is just a really obnoxious but useful reply. And ultimately I started looking at this thing being this is actually a good framework for an article. And so I started, I edited it and made it sort of nicer, and then started sending it to people, and especially lifehacker.com.
Okay. Oh yeah, that's right. I remember seeing something there.
Yeah, and it took 5 weeks of contacting basically every single person who's ever written for Lifehacker, but eventually I got a response from one of the writers there, and she's like, "Oh, well, this is cool. I'll post it tomorrow."
Nice.
And she did, and then the thing went crazy viral. I had a publisher offer within 2 hours.
No way! Wow.
It was insane. Yeah,
was it the same one that you actually ended up signing with?
No, it was a different publisher, but it was enough that because of the publisher offer, I could call agents in New York that night and basically be like, "Hey, will you please take 15% of money that it is already on the table?" And people will answer your calls at that point. So yeah, that's the book kind of happened very, very suddenly in a kind of unexpected way. I didn't realize that the life hacker thing would have that kind of pull.
Yeah. So then you got your book deal, Fluent Forever. And so tell me about the book. I loved it. You wrote it really well. I couldn't put it down. Really well done. How do you feel about it? I mean, was it an easy process to write? Are you happy with the outcome?
I'm really happy with the outcome. It was one of the hardest things I've ever done. I wrote that book.
And you did it by yourself, right? No ghostwriter or anything?
No, I wrote that myself.
Totally.
I wrote I spent 3 months, probably 5 months sort of writing this first draft of the first 3 chapters. And I sent this over to my editor, and I got sort of no reply for a while. And okay. I was like, all right, I don't know what this is about, but I'm going to keep writing. And I just kept writing, and I eventually, and I got nothing back from my agent. Like I sent this to her, and she said nothing.
Yeah.
And I'm just like radio silence. And I'm like, all right, well, silence is fine, I guess. I'm going to keep writing. And I get this letter back from my editor. It's like this 5-page long thing basically saying, no.
Okay.
Absolutely no. In fact, we're basically like, if you give me this in the end, we will cancel your contract.
Wow. Okay.
And like, it wasn't mean or anything. It was brutal, and it was honest, and it was like, and it wasn't just like, no, written in giant letters for 5 pages or something. But it was very detailed, like, this is what you're doing wrong, this is what you're doing wrong, this is what you're doing wrong. Everything here is wrong, and here are all the things that are wrong specifically, and I could go on for another 50 pages, but I won't.
Wow, okay.
Fix it. And so I learned how to write. I mean, I spent a month basically being like, oh, okay, if I don't do this, I'm screwed.
Yeah.
And so I used spaced repetition. I found a book called Style, Lessons in Clarity and Grace. Just a phenomenal. Yeah. For any of your listeners who don't know about this thing, basically it has A-B sentences. Sentence A and B say the same thing, but sentence A is good, sentence B is bad, and here let's talk about why.
Yeah.
Super book. And so I put that in a spaced repetition program, memorizing every single sentence in that book.
Wow.
In terms of, I needed to look at a sentence and know whether is this a good version of the sentence or a bad version of the sentence and why.
Yeah.
And I memorized the whole book that way.
Wow.
And at the same time, I was reading, my editor sent me a copy of a book that basically he had a similar response to originally.
Okay.
It was Jay Hendricks' Thank You for Arguing. It's basically, he sent in a book that was, his first draft was basically like, nemesis is the Greek, word for this, and it means like replying, mimicking someone's argument, and this is like just really crappy to read.
Okay. Yeah.
And my editor sent him the same basic thing, just being like, no. And so he rewrote a book basically talking about his life and how he argues with his kids and how his kids win his arguments and why.
Okay.
And you see these little sidebars at each page being like, by the way, my kid just used mimesis. This is the mimesis.
Okay.
And it's an awesome book. And it's from the very first page, you're like, oh my God, I have the most nerdy, awesome friend ever.
Uh-huh.
And you realize that the book is actually about him. The book is just is a friend that you can meet.
Yeah. And
then it has information in it, but like that's actually the content of the book is someone that you can relate to.
Right.
And so
that's how you want it to read. Exactly.
That's what you want in a book. The thing that actually makes you turn the page is like, hey, I want to meet this guy more. And so after sort of memorizing how to do the craft of writing through that style book and then actually seeing an example of being like, oh, this is actually an enjoyable book to read and this is what it's like, then I rewrote the book and I sent that in. That took probably another 6 months or 8 months or something. But I sent in the first 3 chapters and my editor basically, who is known to send back an equal amount of edits as the book is in length, meaning that like if you have a 20,000 word book or draft, he will send back 20,000 words worth of comments on that.
That's amazing.
Is what I heard from my agent. And he sent back a thing being like, yeah, this is good.
Wow, okay. Just like that. From big no to sure.
and so I finished the next third and then the next third, and generally he had small comments like, hey, change this, change the title here, change that, but tiny things. And then at the end I was expecting a 50,000 word edit, and he was like, no, this is good, I don't want to mess with it. And so that was the writing process. It was I mean, kind of brutal.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not an easy process. You did it all by yourself. I have a book that's been written. I had to deal with it. It got shelved for whatever reason. But I had somebody help me write it, and that helped a lot. But it was still already pretty friggin' hard. So I can just imagine. Yeah,
it's brutal. This thing is it's not an easy thing to do.
Yeah.
I'm glad I'm not doing that right now.
Yeah. So you then did a Kickstarter, right? What was the reason of that? If is that the publishing company that asked you to do that? It was.
No, the first draft of the book. The reason that it was like so brutal is that the first thing I suggest people learn is learn pronunciation.
Right.
And an example I usually cite is this Hungarian word fényképezőgép, which is the word for camera, and it's impossible to remember because it's gibberish.
Yeah.
Like you can remember it for all of 0 seconds. And if you know all the sounds in Hungarian, like then it's a word. It's like, here's a word that I can now remember. And the problem is that my background was, how do you learn pronunciation? You just get a bachelor's degree in opera. And like that's not something that is portable. You can't be like, hey, anyone who wants to learn a language, go get a bachelor's degree.
I can't sing. No.
Right. And so I wrote this chapter. The very first chapter was like the epiglottal fricative is made in the back of your throat with the the uvula and like even behind the just this awful thing.
Yeah.
Trying to kind of like throw something out there, just being like, I don't know what to do for people who don't have this background. Like, get this background, I'll give it to you. Like, here's all the data that's in my head here.
Yeah.
And after sort of like my editor gave me this question, he was like, dude, like I have a Malaysian supermodel that I'm dating in 5 hours and I need to impress her. What the hell do I do? And I started sort of researching the answer to that question. Like, what do you do here? Like, practically speaking, you go on YouTube and you spend 5 hours trying to learn one word really well.
Sure.
But like, if you really want to get those sounds down, like, there's actually research showing exactly how to do it, and no one's done anything with it. And I like looked at this research. It's the research on training Japanese adults how to hear the difference between rock and lock.
Oh yeah, I remember you writing about this.
And like, the research is really impressive. Like, they did 3 hours of training, and they managed to bump them from 50% accuracy up to 80% accuracy, like permanently. And no one had done anything with this research. And so I sort of made a little version of it in Anki, in the spaced repetition software I use, because you can make Anki do almost anything. And I did this for Hungarian as a test case, and I found that after 10 days of 20 minutes a day, I had better Hungarian pronunciation and my ears were better trained in Hungarian than a half semester of French in college.
Okay.
And after that, it was like, this is stupid. Like, this must exist. The idea that this tool doesn't exist when it's that easy is ridiculous. And so that sort of was the idea of the Kickstarter. And also, then it was sort of like, hey, publisher, I'm going to go do this thing. Can you tweet about it, whatever.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where that went.
Nice. So let's talk a bit about what's in the book, starting with the pronunciation. So let's take an example. I'm going to use my fiancée again. She's going to hate me for this, but she speaks a bit of French, what she learned, what she remembers. Not very much, but her accent is that typical American-sounding French accent that just you don't want to speak that over there. Nobody's going to speak back to you in French in France. So if she just wanted to work on pronunciation of words, and anybody else who's in that same boat, what should she do? What's kind of the approach to take?
The thing that people miss in terms of pronunciation is that they usually, when you try to teach pronunciation, you teach mouth stuff. Okay. And you're like, okay, if you want to say the word, su, then you need to have like an oo mouth position, but like an e tongue position. And like, that's all true, and that's useful information if you can actually hear the sound su.
That's true, right?
Which your fiancé probably can't.
Can't distinguish it, yeah.
Yeah, and so in terms of the very first ingredient of good pronunciation is actually ear training, and that's the part that's usually missing. And it's missing because it's hard. Like, ear training, our ears are sort of set at the age of 1 to our native languages.
From what you hear all around you growing up. Exactly. Yeah.
You just pick up whatever's happening, the sort of sound environment between the ages of 6 months and 12 months. Like, that's all the sort of data you got. And then at 12 months, your brain basically is like, okay, well, here's where I'm living. I'm going to stop listening to all that other stuff. Like a baby of your fiance at 5 months could absolutely hear the difference between su and su. Absolutely.
Yeah.
But she lost that ability at 12 months.
Sure.
Because no one was saying it around her. And if you just sort of give someone exposure, like an adult exposure to those sounds and say su, 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 they're still not going to pick it up.
Okay.
But if you force them to take tests, basically, where you're like, I'm going to say one of these two words, and you tell me which one I did. Yeah. Is this the weird French one, or is this the other weird French one? Or is this an English one? Like there's su, su, and su. Like there's 3 different sounds we're talking about.
Yeah.
Tell me which one I said. And basically, you start doing these randomized tests where you're just like, su, which one was it? You have options A, B, or C. Yeah. And it doesn't matter if she gets it wrong or right. She has to guess.
She's training it, yeah.
And you have to tell her whether she got it right or wrong.
The feedback, yeah.
The feedback is also key. Like without the feedback, she won't learn anything either. But you do that, and you do that basically 3 hours, and you'll learn a sound.
Okay.
And that doesn't have to be 3 hours over, in a single session. That could be, in fact, it's actually less than 3 hours from my experience. But like, it goes quick. And so if you're running into sounds you can't hear, then you need to do that kind of testing. One of the things that you can do practically, like I have some guides on my website in terms of just like, how do you actually make these tests in a computer?
Right, yeah.
And that's useful, and if you're sort of computer inclined and stuff, like, yeah, absolutely do that. If you want sort of prepackaged stuff, that's also available on the website. But if you're not going to use my stuff, which is fine, go to a tutor, say words in front of them, or your fiance can go to you and say words. And what the most useful ones of these sort of differentiation exercises, they're minimal pair exercises, what they're called. Su versus su, that's a minimal pair. Things that sound very similar except for one sound. You have her repeat a word. And she goes something like bonjour.
Right.
You're like, let's just talk about that first part. Say bon, like say the word you're saying. She's like bon. And you're like, okay, I'm hearing bon and I want bon.
Right.
So let's start comparing those things. Like try saying bon. And she's not going to be able to go all the way to bon. She's going to go something like bon.
Right.
And I'm like, it's a little closer. And then you start making those exercises with what she's doing now. Now you go, okay, you're saying bon, and I want bon. Okay, now we're going to try.
But it's a slight of refinements, yeah.
Yeah, and you start forcing her to basically tell you, am I impersonating you or am I doing it right?
Right, okay.
And that's a way you can kind of immediately form these kinds of minimal pairs without having to like find a list of them or something like that.
Okay.
So that's the thing. And then once you have that down, once your ears can hear it, the pronunciation comes pretty much naturally. You can get a little bit of better pronunciation with these sorts of discussions of, put your mouth in the O position, put your tongue in the E position. Like that kind of data starts becoming useful only when your ears are actually on it, when they can actually hear it.
Cool. And you have some of these prepackaged things available on your website? You've put these together?
Yes, we finished 10 languages so far. We're doing the last 4 right now. But pretty much if it's a language that is generally learned, it's probably on our site.
Cool. Okay. Nice. So that's the pronunciation. Then what do you get into in your book? What's kind of the next steps?
The next step after you have some sense of what the sounds, basically the next step after you can hear the language is that you start learning words. And you start learning words that are basically, that don't require translation. Meaning that you're learning words that are easily learnable through pictures.
Got it, yeah.
And there's lots of really useful words like that, like table and chair and person and man and woman. Like all these things are things that don't actually require you to know the English word or have the English word on the backside of flashcards or something. Like you can actually take a picture of a cat. Like that's a thing that exists. Yeah. And so I have a list of 625 words that I generally recommend people learn first because they're very, very high frequency words. Like you can also learn watermelon, but like that was not going to help you. Unless watermelon is like your favorite thing in the world, in which case you can always add vocabulary. But like there's a base vocabulary that's used pretty much universally.
And that covers usually what? Is it 70-something% of spoken language? It varies, I'm sure, but...
It varies a bit. Usually when you talk about these kind of percentages, you're talking about a frequency list that's geared towards that particular language, and you're talking about the top 1,000, or the top 10 or the top 100, things like that. With the English example, I think it's something like the top 10 words are in some sense useless because they're all grammatical words, but that's like 25% of the language. Like just the word "the" is I think 5% of the English language in terms of what you encounter, but not very useful. You being able to recognize every "the" in a sentence. Then the top 100 words are around 50% of the language. The top 1,000 words are around 72% of the language, and then the top 2,000 words are around 80%. Okay. And if those are for reading percentages, if they're spoken, it's actually the percentages are higher because we use a smaller vocabulary for spoken.
Makes sense. Okay.
But with the top 625 like nouns basically and visual adjectives like blue and green and things like that, and verbs like to walk, to run, to eat, these kinds of things, where you can also have pictures of people eating. With that, what's practically going to happen is that if you open up a grammar book, you're going to know most of the characters in that sentence. If you have something like the dog eats meat, like you're going to know the word dog, you're going to know the word eats, and you're going to know the word to eat, and you're going to know the word meat.
Right.
And so at that point, if you know all those words, then the grammar becomes, how do I tell this story about dogs, meat, and eating? And then grammar becomes a lot more something you can actually grab in a much more concrete way, in the sense that you're like, okay, I know all the characters, now I'm just focusing on grammar instead of words.
Yeah. One of the things I loved about you describing how to learn and how to go about learning the vocab is just putting the picture, right? I mean, most people will make a flashcard with the word in the language and on the other side the word in English. And often when I'm explaining how I memorize numbers or cards or whatever is, I have a number, I have a card, which at some point, I had to give it a translation to an English word, but ultimately my goal is to look at that card, say, and see the picture immediately. Like that word is the picture. Forget the step where you translate it to the word. That's just another step, right? So why learn vocab comparing it to English when ultimately you just want to see or think of an object or a thing you want to say and it's immediately that word, right?
Yeah.
In that language, yeah. So I thought that was fascinating. So when you're making flashcards, just put the picture of the thing you want and the word in the other language rather than the English, right?
The other thing that's important there is that, like, we have this feeling that, like, a dog is a dog is a dog. Like, that a dog in French and a dog in German and a dog in English. Like, it's just dog. That's dog. And that's sort of true. Like, yes, there is a creature that is called a dog, and it's called different things in different languages. But, like, we're not good at remembering copies of things. Like, just knowing that this is the word for that, like, that's data that from my standpoint, and I think from a general sort of neuroscience standpoint, your brain is like, I don't care.
Right.
Like, why do I need 6 words for the same thing?
Uh-huh.
But as if you, for instance, search on Google Images for chien, you're going to find that the French are choosing different pictures on their blogs than Americans are, or than English-speaking people are. And, like, that kind of distinction where you're like, oh, French dogs are kind of smaller, and they tend to be like
more
lap
poodles,
dogs and things like
black
that.
Poodles, yeah.
Like, there are differences, and, like, those kind of differences are actually memorable, where you're like, this isn't just the word for dog, this is chien, and it means something a little bit different. And, like, we've all had this experience of, I've had people come to me and they're like, yeah, but I'm bad at remembering words, or I'm bad at remembering, like, names of things and stuff like that. And I'm like, okay, well, what's your favorite food in Amsterdam or something?
Yeah.
And they'll, like, say the word immediately. They're like, oh, it's this thing.
Yeah.
Like, they know exactly the word for this in the language and stuff. And I'm like, how many times did you study that word? How many times did you look the translation of that up in the dictionary? They're like, oh, no, I saw it on the menu and I ate it and it was good.
Yeah.
And it's because it's something new. Like, we're really good at remembering new things. Like, everyone knows the word for, like, burrito and things like that. Like these are things that or horchata, like this the rice drink. You're like, it's horchata, of course, it tastes good, so I remember it.
Yeah.
But, like, remembering, like, that horchata means rice drink, like, that's, who cares? Like, rice drink, like, that kind of translation is useless. So trying to find things that make these words unique and new, that's something that actually sticks. And so in terms of these pictures, generally I push people towards searching in the languages on Google Images when their language is something that shows up online, because it just forces you to see, like, they're choosing different stuff than you would choose. And that's important because now it's a new concept.
Yeah. And I think you mentioned it's not so much just putting chien in Google.com. I think you have to change a setting, right? So that it actually searches French Google or something like that? Or does it matter?
There's some settings you can you can just search in terms of just the picture part. You can absolutely just search on images.google.com and you'll get all that stuff. The cool thing about Google is that if you mess with some settings, you can actually get little French like blurbs underneath of using that word in context.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Which is just gold. Google's changed those settings somewhat now that you can still access it, but the sentences are shorter.
Okay. So
you're only getting like a 6-word or 8-word blurb instead of like a whole awesome sentence.
Yeah.
So they're becoming, it's a little less useful than it used to be, but it's still awesome. I mean, you're seeing example phrases basically all the time for any word you want.
Got it. So what you recommend is start with a word set. In this case, I think you also have these prepackaged as well, as 625 words in your target language, and you want to make some type of flashcard. And I think you are a big fan of Anki, which is an app. Is it on the iPhone? Can you get it on your phone?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's great to build out these flashcards, and what's cool about it is it helps you with the spaced repetition, right? Which is helping you remember the ones that you forget more frequently and reminding you of ones that you haven't maybe looked at in a while. Right? Am I right?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. So once you have those words learned, obviously you can always add more words as you get deeper into the language. But the next step obviously is putting them together, right? And that's the grammar. So what's the next thing? Is it just sitting down and learning it? Is it just trying to listen to it and speak it? Put yourself in situations where you're gonna speak it. What is it?
This is going back to that the dog eats meat idea.
Yeah.
Where if you know the character, you've already taught yourself how to learn simple things. You've taught yourself how to learn things that you can picture. Yeah. And so even if you don't know meat, like you can make a flashcard for that now. Now you've practiced 625 times like how to learn things like meat.
Yeah.
So okay, you know dog, you know eats, to eat, and you know meat. But the idea of the in the beginning of that sentence, the dog eats meat.
Right.
The idea of eats, which is now not to eat. This is something else. The idea that meat is at the end of the sentence and dog is in the beginning of the sentence. Those are all new chunks of data that you also need to get into your brain.
Right.
And so the sort of way you bring in grammar is you're still using Anki, you're still using a flashcard system, but you're going into the actual language in use, whether through a grammar textbook or through a tutor or whatever, and you're finding example stories that you can also picture. And you get this picture of a dog eating meat in your head, and you get this example sentence, and it's translated, and you're like, okay, the dog eats meat, and you get it back, and you're like, I'm trying to learn English. Let's say I'm a Spanish speaker. I see the translation in Spanish, and I'm like, okay, I understand what's going on here. I understand the picture. At that point, then you can go in and you can start doing fill-in-the-blank sentences. And so if you have, eats, like what is eats? What does eats look like compared to eat? Well, eats looks like a dog eating meat, like the dog eats meat. That's the word that fits in that slot. And so if you have a sentence like the dog blank meat, and under that sentence you have to eat. This is some kind of special form of to eat that fits in that slot.
Yeah.
And then you have a picture of a dog eating meat. Like, you're like, okay, well this is something I can actually use to help me remember eats.
Yeah.
And you can do that for completely abstract words like the. You can do that for things like and. You can do that like this is the boy and the girl were walking together. Like the picture of it. What does an and look like? Well, an and looks like the boy blank the girl and the boy blank a girl are walking together, and a picture of a girl and a boy holding hands. Like and in this case is for that sentence.
Conjoined, yeah.
Just two people holding hands walking together, and so that's a way to sort of take really, really abstract things that are generally really hard to remember, and make them extremely concrete. Because like this picture of a boy and a girl walking together, like that's a story you can easily remember and can see.
Yeah. So you don't necessarily think that people should sit down and like look at these grammar books and just memorize all the conjugations of all the verbs. I mean, at some point you kind of need to know those, right?
You'd learn them though through example. The kind of idea of I'm going to memorize this chart, where the chart is not connected to stories, is the kind of abstract data that is you're basically learning about a language rather than learning the language.
Yeah.
And so if what you have to do in some sense is you need to connect those things to actual use. And the way you do that is by taking a chart like that and taking that to a tutor if your book doesn't provide it, and saying, I need an example sentence for every single one of these conjugations, for at least one verb.
Sure.
In each sort of type of conjugation.
Right.
I need one, and I need different stories. They can't just be, the boy eats, they, like, I eat, he eats, she eats. Like, that is not a story.
Right.
Like, he eats a pizza, she eats, the best pasta in the world. Like they are eating, ice cream. And the pictures need to be different. The subjects need to be different. Every story needs to be at least somewhat unique. You learn them that way, and they're going to stick. And then they're also going to be useful in the sense that the next time you run into a word like jump, if you've learned eats in that kind of with that kind of complexity and that kind of depth, then the idea of being able to say, okay, jump goes to jumps, is something you'll be able to do. Whereas just sort of memorizing like charts and stuff is not that applicable.
Yeah, and that goes back to everything I try to teach in terms of memory is, you're looking at something abstract, a chart or a list of something that you don't deal with on a daily basis. It means nothing to you yet. That's going to be hard to remember, but if you turn it into a story or a picture, something that associates to things that you already know, it just sticks. That's the whole key to memorization. So I love that. I love that approach. You don't really hear that ever when learning a language, but that's the magic right there, right?
Well, I mean, that's why everyone keeps having this experience of going to classes and not learning anything.
Exactly. Yeah.
So that.
And then, so I guess the final step is once you've done all that, is to use the language, to immerse yourself as possible. And obviously that's hard for different people, depending where they are, how much free time they have. But, you could watch the news online in that language, or listen to podcasts, or speak with your friends, or just go to meetups, stuff like that, right? But that's where you have to kind of make the effort afterwards, because you're not going to learn a language just by studying. I think most of it, honestly, will come from speaking it and immersing yourself, right?
You can get very, very far with just studying, meaning that you can actually get to a point where you're thinking in that language on your own, or with the help of like a tutor, but like a tutor once a week maybe. That's something that is actually doable. But yes, there's these skills, reading, writing, listening, and reading, writing, listening, and speaking. There we go. Those are individual skills that can be worked on individually, that have to be worked on individually. Meaning that you can train listening, but only by forcing yourself to listen to content that's difficult. Yeah. And that's the only thing that's going to make that get better. You can train speaking, but only by talking about things that are hard to talk about, where you don't have all the words. Those are specific things. But that said, you can actually get to a point where you're thinking in full sentences in a language without sort of immersing yourself. Okay. And the immersion step is actually becoming extremely easy in terms of just accessibility. Like right now, I have this Hungarian tutor and a Japanese tutor, and we're chatting for an hour a week, and I think I'm paying like $4 an hour.
That's crazy.
It's crazy, and from their standpoint, it's kind of like, I'm getting to chat with someone and it's fun. Yeah. And I'm getting paid for it, and I'm in my pajamas. From their standpoint, it's like I would do this anyway because it's kind of fun. But this is the accessibility we have now. And at this point, if you want to talk to a native speaker exclusively in their language and without having to spend half an hour, we're going to exchange English and Spanish, which is an awesome thing. But even if you don't want to spend that half hour speaking in English, you can get that for $4 to $6 an hour, which is insane.
What's the service you use? Is it a specific website?
I use italki.com, ITALKI.
Okay, that's crazy.
Yeah. It's crazy. It's amazing, and it ends up being almost cheaper just to sort of sit at home and chat with people than to do almost anything else.
And are they tutors? Can they correct you and stuff, or are they just speaking their language?
You get both. You can sort of choose what you want. I generally actually prefer the people who are not tutors, because the tutors generally have a curriculum. They're just this is what we're going to do. Right. And at this point, I know what I'm looking for, and what I'm really looking for is just I need a native speaker who I can just ask questions from, and who will ideally, if I'm actually pretty experienced in the language, I'm looking for a native speaker who doesn't have good English.
Yeah, okay. That's, of course. Very cool stuff. So we've talked almost for 50 minutes here, but just would love to know, what are you working on now? What's next? Are you writing another book? Probably. It sounded like you weren't.
Not right now. I mean, I'm thinking about it. I sort of have even though it is a lot of work, I learned to kind of love writing. But I would say right now the main focus is finishing that Kickstarter. I started it 3 years ago, and we ended up promising 65 products. Yeah, and it is insane. And so we're on our last 4 languages, and then I need to do all of those again for people learning English. So English for Spanish speakers, English for French speakers, English for Hungarian speakers. But that part will take a lot less time than the original work. Once that Kickstarter is done, I think the big next goal is going to be creating a new app. We're starting to look at the idea of creating a spaced repetition app that is really geared towards language learning and allows you to sort of take sentences out in the wild and dump them into your head, which is one thing that's missing in Anki. Like the idea, if I'm at a restaurant and I see some awesome food and I'm like, hey waiter, what is this thing? That should be able to go in my flashcard system from my phone rather than me having to write down the word, go home, and then create flashcards on my computer.
Yeah, I agree. Okay.
So
cool. And are you planning on learning more languages? Is there one that you're dying to learn or you're working on other than Japanese?
Japanese is the one I've always wanted to learn, and so that's sort of been my big priority now. January through my wedding in June is going to be Spanish. Yeah. And then probably I'll go back to Japanese for a bit.
Okay. That's very cool.
Yeah.
One last question. Who is your favorite polyglot? I mean, you're a polyglot now. Did you ever think you'd be a polyglot?
Not really, no.
That's a cool title.
I guess so, yeah. People are like, what's that?
Yeah.
Sometimes it's on my business card. They're like, polyglot, what is that? Favorite polyglot, gosh. I don't know if I keep up on. I remember seeing the study schedule of I don't know how I pronounce his last name, Alexander Alcois.
Okay, yeah. I think I'm not a big. I don't know many people either, but I was just curious.
Yeah, no, I don't keep up on it, but I remember looking at his schedule, which was something like 6 hours a day of study. That I was super impressed at that. I was just like, wow, like you are dedicated in a way that I am absolutely not.
Yeah. Okay. Very cool. Well, look, thank you so much for taking the time. I know language is always one of those things that everybody would love to learn, French or Italian. That's like everybody would say that and would love to, but it's not always something that they can just do or they think they can do. They actually can, but you make it very accessible and easy to approach. So for anybody who wants to know more about it, I'll put your information in the descriptions below, and please check out his book, Fluent Forever. It's awesome. And thanks so much, Gabe.
Thank you for having me.
Hopefully we'll keep in touch, and look forward to hearing about your next projects.
Awesome. Thanks.
Cool, man. Take it easy.
You too.